and welcome to Arbitral Insights, a podcast series brought to you by our international arbitration practice lawyers here at Reed Smith. I'm Peter Roscher, Global Head of Reed Smith's International Arbitration Practice. I hope you enjoy the industry commentary, insights and anecdotes we share with you in the course of this series, wherever in the world you are. If you have any questions about any of the topics discussed, please do contact our speakers. And with that, let's get started.
Hello everyone and welcome back to our Arbitral Insights podcast series, our latest edition. And we've got a wonderful guest today. We have Dana MacGrath. Hello Dana.
Hi, how are you?
Very good. Great to see you. I've been looking forward to this podcast for a long time, and thank you ever so much for taking the time out to do this one with us. For those of you who don't know Dana, and I know many of you will know Dana, I'm going to briefly introduce her. I could literally speak for a number of minutes about her incredible, illustrious antecedents, but I'm going to try and keep it as brief as I can. So Dana is a very much in-demand international arbitrator. She has her own arbitration practice called MacGrath Arbitration, and she's also a member of Arbitra International. She serves as a sole arbitrator and as a co-arbitrator and as chair of arbitral tribunals. Before she began her practice as an independent arbitrator, Dana worked for many years in private practice and in-house, and including a time involved in third-party funding in arbitration. So it gives Dana a lot of perspective here. She's incredibly well involved in a number of aspects of the arbitration world, and she's very committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that's a topic that we're going to be exploring, Dana, in the course of this podcast. And as well as that, she's a huge champion of racial equality in international arbitration and of course, equal representation. She speaks and writes on arbitration issues very regularly. And also, fun fact, apart from speaking fluent English, she is also proficient in French, which is taken not just from her studies, but from the fact that she lived in Paris for a year. So, Dana, I know I've condensed your incredibly, hugely illustrious background very briefly, but I hope that's at least given our listeners a bit of an introduction into who you are. And it really is an honor to be doing this podcast with you. Let me ask you the first question that I had for you, which is, how did law find you, or how did you find law?
So I was a legal assistant or paralegal at a law firm immediately after college or university. And I worked for the litigation group at a small boutique law firm as a paralegal. And I realized that I really loved the practice of law. I applied to law school. The firm convinced me to defer that a year and stay on as a paralegal one more year because we were taking a case to trial, which was super exciting. And I got a lot of interesting experience as a paralegal in the law. And then, went to law school from there, and the rest, and we could talk about.
Well, it's worked out very well.
Do paralegal work and choose not to pursue law. I'm one of those who did paralegal work and chose definitely to pursue law.
Well, we're all much better for that choice, Dana, I can tell you. As is the world of international arbitration, and we'll dive into a bit of this now. So, in terms of your background before you became an arbitrator, it's incredibly rich and diverse. As I mentioned, you worked in-house and you worked in private practice. So, when it came to you choosing to then focus as an arbitrator, what led you to want to have your independent arbitration practice?
So it was sort of an evolution since I've been an arbitration practitioner, which I focused on early in my career. So I started as a traditional U.S. trained litigator in the litigation department at Sullivan and Cromwell. At some point, when I moved to O'Melveny, I was assigned to a large international arbitration matter, just for the need of extra hands on the case. And that case actually was extremely involving and demanding. And so it was an opportunity for me to learn all sorts of facets of arbitration procedure, as well as sort of, how you put on a substantive case in the context of arbitration. And then there were judicial award enforcement proceedings that I was also involved in. And through that case, I got sort of a crash course, or a long crash course, on international arbitration as an area of practice. And then decided that that was an area that I really enjoyed. I was able to use some of my French language background for some of the research that I did, and was able to do that for other cases going forward. And by mid-level, senior level associate, I was fully specialized in international arbitration, while still taking on some U.S. litigation cases, because typically for me in an international arbitration practice, most of what I would do would be international arbitration, but I always had a toe in the litigation world as well.
Thank you. And then in terms of looking back at your career to date, so both in terms of your time in practice and now as an independent arbitrator, tell us a little bit about a few of your mentors and inspirations along the way.
Sure. So early in my career, when I got that case that was so informative and a crash course education, that was a case that I worked with Benno Kimmelman on. And so after that case, I worked with Benno Kimmelman on a number of cases because he was the chair of the arbitration practice group. So while I had not anticipated doing international arbitration as a career when I started that first case, when I decided to specialize in it, I got a lot of mentorship and advice from him, and we worked together a lot in that field. There have also been a number of people that I know from the arbitration community that have been mentors or inspirations, and those words kind of sort of blend together. People who from the community who you either worked with on a project. For example, Joe Newhouse at Sullivan and Cromwell, who I knew from Sullivan and Cromwell, but I hadn't worked with him. I then worked with him on bar committee projects, and he chaired one of the major New York City bar committees, the International Commercial Disputes Committee. And so I had an opportunity to work with him on projects, and a number of the members of those committees. There's two committees in the New York City Bar that do a lot of arbitration work. So that's sort of a vehicle to meet mentors and people who are inspirations. So Joe Newhouse is an example, but there's many more in that context, especially because the New York and I think the global international arbitration community is so collegial and open to including new members, which is something I champion and I try to augment as much as possible. I'd also mention Lucy Reed, who was an incredible inspiration. I met her early on when she was with Freshfields in New York, and she gave very valuable informal mentoring advice. I would see her at events, and she was always very accessible, and she's obviously had a very developed career since then, and continues to be an inspiration. Claudia Solomon is someone who I've known for decades, and I think peer mentorship is just as important as people who are senior to you. And Claudia is a wonderful lawyer and person, and we've often discussed career paths and given each other advice, and she's been very supportive and helpful, and I hope I've done the same for her. So that's an example. I really hope that people take away that peer mentorship is really important at all stages. It's not only people who are senior to you or a generation senior to you that are mentors. It's really everyone who's in your circle. Finally, I have to give a shout out, and we can maybe talk about this more later, to the co-founders of Arbitral Women, Mérez Philippe and Louise Barrington, with whom I worked very closely when I was with Arbitral Women. But we may get to that later.
We definitely will, because you've already set the scene very, very nicely on that, Dana, because we will be delving further into some aspects of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that's definitely something I want to cover in the course of that discussion. But I mean, it is fair to say, though, before we get into that, I mean, you are inspirational because you are one of not many prominent female arbitrators. And there was a post I saw from you just yesterday about unicorns, about the unicorn book on female arbitrators, which I thought was it's something that so many of us who practice in this field, who live in this community, know that we've come a long way, absolutely, in terms of better gender representation, but we've still got a long way to go. And what you just mentioned there about, the people you mentioned have all been huge mentors and inspirations. But I do want to let it be noted to our listeners that you, Dana, are an exceptionally inspirational person yourself. And I just wonder, in terms of arbitral women, and, we can talk about this now, what more can we all do? I mean, apart from giving pledges to ensure we consider more representation from the incredibly talented body of women lawyers out there, what more can we all be doing, including the institutions and the consumers of arbitration, to ensure we better represent women in arbitrator appointments?
So I think that is an issue that the arbitration community continues to grapple with on a daily basis, at least for some of us. I think the pledges are very well intended, and the people who sign the pledge, whether it's a pledge for gender representation or other diverse representation in the arbitration community, I think that they are people who are in principle committed to advancing diversity and racial equity in arbitration. But your question, what do you do to sort of achieve your pledge or effectuate what you believe in and your goals? And that is not as easy to do as you might think, because as you pointed out, there's not that wide a body of diverse arbitrators that are known to people. And I think that some of the recent initiatives, including this guide to women arbitrators, a global guide to women arbitrators that was released by Mute Off Thursdays at the end of 2022. That was a project that was led by Emma Wiedek Friedman and Elena Gutierrez for Mute Off Thursdays. They invested a tremendous amount of time and energy in collecting the CVs and bios and forms completed by, I think, close to 200 women, and put together a huge compendium, the inaugural edition, which will be updated from time to time, to try to provide the arbitration market tool by which they can choose diverse arbitrators to propose to clients, or, if they're in a just situation where they're appointing in-house counsel, you can also use the guide to make suggestions to counsel or have a dialogue. The burning question for everyone who wants to try to effectuate diversity is, where are the diverse candidates? Where are the diverse arbitrators? Where are the diverse lead counsel? And these kinds of compendium or guides or collections of names and CVs of those who are very well qualified and diverse, I think do a lot to broaden the pool of diverse arbitrators and experts and others who serve in this field. So that is a relatively new phenomenon, that in the last 5 years that there's been an effort to actually compile and make available lists of different sectors of diverse arbitrators and practitioners in the field.
Thank you, Dana. I think, that's it's such an important development, because, I think raising awareness of these sorts of things is very important. And it's something we've got to keep at the front of the agenda all the time. It's not just something that we as a group should be doing from time to time. It should be all the time. And in amongst that, I think there's an even, as vitally important that gender representation is as equal as possible. I also think in amongst that, there's also the ethnic diversity. So more female arbitrators of an ethnic background is also something that's a unicorn within a unicorn, so to speak. And I think that's also something. So there are many strands to this, but no, your thoughts there are very, very valuable. Thank you very much, Dana. And I know something that's very close to your heart is nature and the great outdoors. So what are your thoughts about greener arbitration?
I think that the campaign for greener arbitrations is a fabulous initiative, and I'm happy to be a part of the North American subcommittee and sort of help augment the visibility of the campaign here in North America. And I have always been a nature lover. I'm an urban dweller who needs sort of to decompress in nature. And I think that many of us, really rejuvenate and enjoy nature. And, we're all responsible for the planet and trying to ensure that we maintain the health of the planet or restore the health of the planet in the ways that we can. And I think the campaign tries to make it more tangible by having protocols that people can implement in the arbitration space to take steps to make their arbitration practice greener. So those protocols are available on the website. And then we did for Earth Day this year a series of sort of fun videos for some of us as part of the pledge. And I did mine from a botanic garden in my neighborhood to try to share the beauty of nature, but also to contrast the fact that it was directly under the flight pattern into JFK. And so the birds were accompanied by a loud roar of an airplane every 30 seconds.
There's the irony. Yeah.
It is, but it was, so I think that that's a great initiative. I'm also really excited about just going back to the racial equality issue in arbitration, the initiative REAL, Racial Equality for Arbitration Lawyers. And that was launched just a few years ago in the middle of pandemic by one of my inspirations and peer mentors, Rekha Rangachari, together with Kabir Dugal and Karina Baltag. But I've worked a lot with Rekha Rangachari on the board at Arbitral Women, and I know how much energy she put into that, and she put in just as much energy into REAL initiative, Racial Equality for Arbitration Lawyers, as did the other co-chairs. And so I think it's important to see the people who are launching these initiatives, how committed they are to changing the landscape of diversity, and to the point that you mentioned, the sort of the intersectionality of gender and race or gender and ethnicity. Those are issues that are being explored by some of these newer groups, I think, including even the equal representation of experts, which is a very recent initiative launched in the last year. And then a shout out to Amanda Lee, who's, I think, quite infamous in the arbitration world for her initiative Careers in Arbitration, where she tries to make available and known opportunities for new joiners to the arbitration community. But also, I think importantly, she very recently launched what's called WIA Friday, Women in Arbitration Friday. And every Friday she posts on LinkedIn and maybe other platforms, but I think it's LinkedIn. That's where I've seen it. She posts announcements of achievements of women of all levels in our practice. So not just the senior, most renowned women who have been appointed to their latest, leadership role, but, younger, newer parts of our practice who are either their first internship in arbitration or their first role as an associate in the arbitration space, or whatever their appointment is. It really is such a broad spectrum, and she really embraces the new generation, the entrance to this community. And I think to achieve diversity, we really need to embrace the new entrance to this community. And I commend her. And I mean, she's also launched many other initiatives. We could spend a long time talking about that. But if you're looking for women, of all sectors, as interns, as associates, or just to find who are the up and coming women, who are the future women, that's a great place to look too. So the compendium is one place to look for arbitrators, the WIA Friday, Arbitral Women's Database, the Arbitration Pledge. I mean, there's so many groups now that are vehicles to finding diverse arbitrators and diverse members of the arbitration community, which I think collectively we should be proud of, because none of these organizations would have had the success that they've had if everyone in the community didn't really rally behind them and support it.
It's so true. And I'm so glad that you said all that, because the people you've mentioned there are all people who've done so much. I mean, just to take three names, Mandy, Rekha, and Kabir. I mean, if you were to take just those three, and what they've done, it's extraordinary. And it's all about it's just keeping the message going and helping each other and just moving things forward. I think things have come forward a long way since the early days, when the world of arbitration was really like this sort of mystical world where everyone was just doing stuff, and it was all very much, you can't come into this inner circle type thing. Thank goodness it's all broken down now, and it's a lot more inclusive, and everyone's helping each other more. So that was very, very good to hear, Dana. Thank you.
There's one thing that I think goes unnoticed or is less noticed, and that is the incredible amount of time and effort that happens behind the scenes for each of these kinds of organizations. So, from Arbitral Women, I met some truly inspirational, dedicated women when I was working on the board as president of Arbitral Women, one of which is your colleague, Rebecca Mosquera. She took on an incredibly heavy role. She actually took on two roles that had been staffed by two other people. And she took both roles on and handled them all herself. And she was always available, always dedicated, always had a positive attitude. No matter what it was, she achieved it, and she did it with a smile, and it was a pleasure to work with her. I didn't really know her until the board experience working together, and she was so inspiring. And that's part of why she was given such a tremendous role on the board. And there were others on the board too that I was just so struck by the commitment of people who sign up to be a part of these organizations. The energy of Rekha, of Kabir, of Mandy, of Rebecca. I mean, these are people who really make a difference because they invest so much energy, and it's really, they really love what they're doing. They're willing to go sleepless nights to make practice more diverse and to support individual members of the arbitration community who otherwise would perhaps be unknown or lesser known. And really supporting each other in this space, I think, is truly important.
I agree. And one thing I haven't told you this, but Rebecca, I'm blessed to be one of her mentors here at Reed Smith. And she is absolutely phenomenal. She is just, I could do a podcast just praising her for half an hour because there's so much to praise. But she really is one of my most favorite people in the firm. And she's one of those up-and-coming superstars who are going to be incredible in years to come, as incredible as she is already. So let me just, as we come to the end of this session, because we are, as always, coming to the end because I talk so much on these things. And, let me just, delve into some non-arbitration things, some non-law things. We've spoken a bit earlier in this podcast about your love of nature. And so tell us a little bit about sort of things that you love to do in your spare time. I mean, do you go hiking? Do you go to parks? Do you go to other places where you can enjoy nature?
I do, as much as possible. I really love hiking. I'm not hiking Mount Everest or anything truly challenging.
Not yet anyway, Dana, not yet.
My hikes are called, walks in the nature, but I love being outdoors. I love being in the woods. I love discovering nature areas when I travel to an urban center and there's, some aspect of nature that I can enjoy. For example, the ICA conference in Edinburgh, we had a group that did a nature hike. It was an amazing experience, and we had views of Edinburgh that we otherwise wouldn't have had, and it was a truly bonding experience too, to do it with colleagues in the arbitration community. So I try to get to parks and to rural areas, hiking. Even in New York, there's so many places, just an hour out of the city you can go and discover, aspects of New York that you didn't know were there. And I think that it's really helpful to people for just sort of life balance. Most of our arbitration work takes place in some fabulous cities that I love, but you need to balance it off, or I think it's helpful to balance it off with time in nature.
Absolutely. No, so true. It's a bit of a reset, isn't it?
And since I started being a full-time arbitrator, I have a bit more control of my schedule, although that's starting to feel less and less as I get more and more appointments. But being able to actually carve out and do some of the things that when I was in big law, I just never got to do that much of, because, I was really working, very, very long days, 7 days a week, and juggling time zones. And I really admire everyone who's able to do that for a very long time. And I'm happy to say that I survived and I'm on the other end, and I'm happy that I did it, but I'm also happy that I'm on the other end and I'm now a full-time arbitrator, and I really love doing that. But it's also really nice to be able to know that, I have a little bit more space to carve out time for a park walk on a weekend than I did, when I was in big law. So.
Yeah, so true. It's very important to carve that time out. And so I know, and you mentioned this about sort of you can go an hour out of New York and do stuff, and arbitrations do often happen in some very nice places around the world. But is there one particular place outside of the US that you've particularly enjoyed traveling and you enjoy going back to, or would love to go back to sometime soon?
I really love Paris. I know that's a city and not a rural area. There are beautiful parks in Paris. But Paris is one of the cities that I love. There are many European cities that I think are beautiful and I love. But there's not necessarily places that I go back to regularly. I really am interested in exploring and finding new places. I really loved going to Edinburgh for the first time for ICA, and look forward to going to some places I haven't been. But Paris will always have a special place in my heart.
And understandably so, because you did live there for at least a year, so and you speak French. So, but Dana, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure and a privilege to do this podcast with you. Thank you very much for taking the time to do it. I look forward to meeting you in person very, very soon. And thank you for being the inspirational person you are.
Well, thank you for including me. This has been really a pleasure for me, and I look forward to seeing you in person too soon.
Thank you.
Arbitral Insights is a Reed Smith production. Our producer is Ali McCardle. For more information about Reed Smith's global international arbitration practice, email arbitralinsights@reedsmith.com. To learn about the Reed Smith Arbitration Pricing Calculator, a first-of-its-kind mobile app that forecasts the cost of arbitration around the world, search Arbitration Pricing Calculator on reedsmith.com or download for free through the Apple and Google Play app stores. You can find our podcast on Spotify, Apple, Google Play, Stitcher, reedsmith.com, and our social media accounts at Reed Smith LLP on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. This podcast is provided for educational purposes. It does not constitute legal advice and is not intended to establish an attorney-client relationship, nor is it intended to suggest or establish standards of care applicable to particular lawyers in any given situation. Prior results do not guarantee a similar outcome. Any views, opinions, or comments made by any external guest speaker are not to be attributed to Reed Smith LLP or its individual lawyers. All rights reserved.